Fellas, I've gathered you all here today to once and for all find the definitive answer to the question, do the silly numbers matter on FF logs? My answer will be the one and only shining light through the darkness from now until the end of time in any MMO that has ever had parsing included, and they'll look back on this video when they need it most and find the solace that they need. Okay, maybe it isn't that dramatic, but recently there was a bit of drama around some of the ranking stuff on FF logs, and it made me think, realistically, where do I stand on parsing as a whole? So I wanted to make this video to help some people understand the concept of parsing better and come to the conclusion themselves, does it actually matter at all? Oh, and I'm kinda like a VTuber or something now, you know, twitch.tv/Riot, or repeat twitch.tv or whatever. So returning viewers, please don't be frightened by the enemy guy in the corner. I promise you're not gonna catch the weeb. It doesn't spread. Okay, it's not like that. And just based on the nature of the video, some parts might be a little information dense, so bear with me. I'll try to make it all as digestible as possible with my dashing charm and my sweet vibes and my huge cheeks. Okay, first things first though, what is a parse? Parsing, in a nutshell, is the act of logging certain metrics during a fight in an MMO like Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, such as damage done or healing done, and uploading them to an external site such as FF logs in order to gauge where you sit statistically against other players. For example, if I do a savage fight on DPS, upload the log and see I've gotten a 55, it means that the kill was in the 55th percentile of damage compared to other players who did the same fight on the same job. As you can imagine, there is more things that go into parsing and how it's calculated in general, but at the end of the day, if you search for someone's logs, the numbers you're shown are the ones most people care about under the RDPS category. The colour of the parse indicates the ranking of the parse, from lowest to highest being grey, green, blue, purple, orange, pink and gold for rank 1. And red being a secret evil parse only for the most dastardly of devils. Sorry, I lied, it just means that there was an error and it's gonna get deleted. I'm sure there are better researchers out there explaining all of the ins and outs of parsing, but I'm not gonna explain it because that's not the goddamn point. I just want to know, does big number mean good player? And of course, I know some of you guys are gonna need to see my credentials. I know there are gonna be some sweats out there who have clicked this video and will refuse to listen to what I say unless I know how to actually parse well. You know, I do truthfully feel like a lot of the attitude around parsing can be in general pretty toxic. I think too often the idea of parsing is worthless and anyone who parses is a shitty greedy player is parroted by players who quite frankly aren't very good at the game, and on the flip side we've all heard the stories of toxic players who aim for high parses who will ruin parties just trying to get a better parse. So for the sake of transparency, I am willing to expose my logs to the world. You can decide for yourself, am I just a shitter who nobody should listen to, or am I a sweaty nerd who nobody should listen to? Okay, so opening the page, at first glance you can see that my parses are a little bit all over the place. I've got the oranges and then a blue and a grey. But if you look at the last two tiers, you'll see relatively similar high numbers. The first tier was my first time doing Savage, besides dabbling at the end of Shadowbringers, so I was really excited back then to be able to even get a pink. My ultimate logs also reflect a pretty similar pattern. Uwu here is a bit of the odd one out because that was my first ultimate and I haven't cleared the fight on this character in a long time. But for both T and UCOB, I'm in or near the top 10 for Reapers. DSR, I could never figure out how to parse well, just truthfully. And in top, I have a purple, which, I mean, that's acceptable at the end of the day. So all in all, you can see my parses are pretty decent in general. Not top players, but definitely better than most. So let's jump into the meat of this video. Does it really all matter? So obviously, if you want to be cynical, no, it doesn't matter. If you go outside and tell your neighbor Dave you got a purple on top, he's gonna think you're a psychopath. Or if you walk up to the local Limsa loiterer who hasn't done anything but stand still in Limsa for the last few months, they also probably aren't gonna care that much. So please leave a sassy comment about how parsing is dumb so that I get that juicy YouTube algorithm push. But remember, just because you don't care about it doesn't mean others are wrong for caring. So in my experience as someone with a bit of raid experience at this point, and someone who's done a significant amount of content in PF alone, I will check the logs of people and gauge a player based off of their logs at first glance. I have cleared content with people who have multiple rank 1s, and I've cleared content with people who, for some reason, struggle to get anything higher than a literal 1 in most fights. So in that sense, of course, at the end of the day, a clear is all that matters. but generally I will trust the abilities of a player with higher parses than one with lower parses, which might not come as a shock. Getting a high parse usually means that you're playing the job optimally with as perfect as an uptime as possible during the fight, and using buffs at the right time, and you know, just doing everything you should be doing on your job. Only someone who has invested the time to be able to do those things is gonna stumble on the decent parses, and likely is a sign that I'm playing with someone who cares enough to try to learn from their mistakes and improve, making them a more valuable member to have in a party. On the flip side, if I see someone who does sit permanently in the lower ends of parses no matter the fight, I generally imagine them not to care too much about playing optimally and just sticking to the bare minimum they've learned through trial and error to clear content. After what I said about high parson players, you'd probably imagine I would say that lower parson players are lazy sons of guns who refuse to learn, but I don't think that's true for all cases. I'll have infinitely more respect for the player who clears an ultimate with that one that went out of their way to learn the entire fight and just do it for themselves, compared to someone who refuses to do it all, for example. And I know from personal experience that sometimes circumstances lead to the inability to play optimally. I play on NA servers from Ireland, so before I got a bit of a external help, shall we say, it was quite literally impossible for me to play optimally because the innate lag in my GCDs was so high that my abilities would naturally drift after a few minutes, meaning that I was always going to be disadvantaged to someone who could play with lower ping. Factors like these can dramatically affect parses, so it is important to not write off people who do clear content with lower parses. Just to help you understand the process of getting a higher parse a little better, let me just break it down. This might be a little information heavy, so if you're a bit bored, take this time to write your sins in the comments and I will forgive you. In order to get a higher parse, you generally need 3 things. 1. Playing your job optimally, like I said, throughout the entirety of the fight. From GCD 1 to the last, you need to be making practically no rotational errors. 2. The knowledge of how to do the fight in as efficiently as a way as possible, to the point where doing the fight itself can kind of be second nature and not require too much brain power. And 3, a good kill time, as in quite literally the amount of time it takes to kill the boss. People who aren't familiar with parsing at all might not be so surprised by number 1 and 2, but might not understand just how important kill times really are for parsing. It doesn't just come down to, did I do more damage than someone else? Because that raw metric isn't enough to determine if you've performed better than someone else. Generally, in Final Fantasy at least, the highest point of damage for any job in any team composition is about every 2 minutes, when the buffs come off cooldown and are used. If you're able to pick up what I'm putting down, it means that killing a boss in the middle of that 2-minute window is probably going to be better statistically compared to killing the boss at a random time outside of that. That is one factor that goes into high-end parsing that I think isn't really well known among the general player base, and as tiers go on, gear gets better, so sometimes it's hard to get a good kill time in a fight because the bosses are killed so quick. It gets to the point where in some fights, parsing parties will end up designating a sandbag player who purposely does as little damage as possible to make sure that everyone else in the team gets a better kill time. It is more of the exception rather than the rule that you need something like, say, a sandbag player in order to parse well, but it is something just to keep in mind how sometimes parsing well can be the effort of an unnatural state of play that most random groups won't find themselves in. On the flip side, what leads to a grey parse, for example? Honestly, just a sheer lack of fundamentals or unoptimal play. If we take my P12S clear, for example, I cleared on my first time getting past a certain mechanic near the end of the fight, meaning that for the last few minutes of the fight, I was truly letting Jesus take the wheel with the rotation so I could just focus on doing mechanics properly. I even ended up dying, which very obviously could turn any decent run into a bottom of the barrel grey parse. If I went back in over and over, got the mechanics down properly, and felt comfortable just focusing on my rotation, I have no doubt that I could bump that up to a purple within a few kills, but as it stands, my fundamentals and knowledge of that fight are just not there. So even as a player who can comfortably get oranges or higher with a bit of effort, my parse will probably sit grey for the time being. It is instances like this that you have to use a bit of discretion to judge. If a player generally parses well, does have a one-off per parse, you can probably account it for an extreme circumstance rather than it being the norm. So at this point, I don't really think there's any need for me to go on and on about the ins and outs of parsing. You hopefully get the point by now. I have one final piece of evidence to present to the court before this final judgment. The fact that the higher the parse, the more diminishing the returns. This is something that I think is really looked over or hard to grasp when you just look at the numbers on the website. In reality, the difference between a gold parse and say an orange parse really isn't that dramatic of a difference. In comparison, the difference between a grey parse and a blue can be much wider. Getting a pink or a gold is obviously something really to be proud of, something to celebrate, and generally is the mark of an elite player, but the difference between a pink parser and an orange or even a high-end purple parser really isn't that dramatic in the grand scheme of things. So all in all, my personal conclusion is that... Hold on, I gotta build the suspense just a little bit more. I know you're on the edge of your seat. Yes, I think parses matter. But not for the reasons many of the more fragile, soft, uwu, anxiety-ridden players might think of. No, I won't get angry if you have grey parses. If I'm joining a PF to do a fight, I'm accepting that I will be playing with a random group of players, and usually I'm just going to be focused on my own performance. And if a player with better parses than I have joins, then sweet, that's a nice surprise. The reason I think it matters is simply because not only as Final Fantasy players, but even just as humans, I think we can and should always strive to improve ourselves where we can. Whether you want to push for rank 1s or you simply want to hit that goal of frequent blue parses, I think the act of wanting to improve as a player is an admirable trait for any potential teammate regardless of where they currently stand in their logs. I think it is unfortunate to have players who throw their toys out of the pram when you suggest that they can improve and instead will happily sit on extremely low parses and, to be honest, probably aren't clearing a lot of content anyway. And they just generally refuse to improve at all because it would mean putting in even a fraction of effort on their part to learn their job better. So it just means that the burden is on the other players that they play with to make up for their lack of damage and generally their lack of giving a shit. Use FF logs and parsing in general as a personal barometer. It's not something you need to compare yourself to other players with unless you really want to, but instead, just strive to be better than you were last fight, last tier, last expansion, and as long as you're moving forward, it really doesn't matter what others think. I'll catch you guys next time.